Just good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mr. Bharat Salhotra, for inviting me to present my views. I recognize a lot of faces here. So, having spent 26 years in the railways and just 4 in the industry space, it's a little difficult for me to talk about the industry because I've been invited to share my views on the industry side. But so please empathize with me in case I veer too much towards the railways and less towards the industry. As was said in the introduction, I look after Alstom business in India and South Asia. We are contractors and we are also manufacturers, and we are doing the famous Madhepura project where we are struggling with SBI to close the financing. So we are close to the financial closure. But a key question that is asked by SBI and team is, how are you sure that the railways will offtake all the 800 locomotives, show us their P&L, show us their balance sheet, and we struggle a little bit with that. But anyways, with the support of your chairman, I think we are moving in the right direction. We should be able to close it. So when I talk here about as an industry representative, I would focus not just as a manufacturer, as a contractor, but also as a concessionaire, as an operator, and as a supplier. Mr. Lal very nicely put it in his introductory words on the fact that he gave an analogy of the bicycle, and he said that railways is like a bicycle, and we in order to move fast with the bicycle, we need to be able to redesign the accounting reforms, and he mentioned about it being the need for a transformational change. I cannot agree more with him. Because, you're on a bicycle. Actually, you're on the track, but you can get very well off track very quickly if you don't have your data and information correct. And it is actually a transformational change which is needed. So, if I were to just take out of this audience, how many of us sitting here are from non-accounts, non-finance? Can we all raise our hands? See, just a small splinter, maybe not even 5% of the total people here are from a non-finance, non-IRAS, non-finance background. And that is an area of concern, because when we talk about accounting reforms cannot be done in isolation of the rest of the organization. The kind of change which would need to be implemented would have to be across the organization, across departments, across geographies, across functions. And yet today we are looking at accounting reforms as singularly as a project for the accounts department. And I think the moment we start with that view, we are condemned to fail in the scheme of things. So I think there is need for more involvement, more engagement across the organization, because otherwise it will not work. Railways, there's enough said about the railways. It's a vast organization, 21,000 trains moving every day, 1.3 million employees, output carrying 3 million tons of freight every day, one population equivalent to Australia, moving on an everyday basis. It's truly the lifeline of the country. And that said, it has over the last 150, 160, 170, 80 years, whatever, since it has come from 1856, it has essentially been an inward-looking, production-oriented organization. And that has generally moved well because it has often been treated as a monopoly, So whatever we manufacture, you as a customer have to buy. That's been the broad mantra. So you buy what we sell. That's been the mantra. But over the last few years, as the finance minister very, very cogently put across, as the railways gets buffeted with more and more economic pressures and more forces, related to competition, related to road, aviation, evolution, I think they will need to transform themselves. An interesting chapter which I read, which is the Economic Survey 2014-15, I would very strongly urge everybody to read it. It starts with an introduction. This is chapter 6, and it says, the introduction of railways has been historically the most powerful single initiator of takeoffs. And it goes on to describe how the rail space, how investment in the rail sector is one of the fastest ways to move forward for the country. A multiplier effect because of the forward and backward linkages, and Mr. Salhotra spoke about it, is somewhere between a factor of 5 to a factor of 8, depending on how you do the math. So an increase in output of 1 rupee has an 8 times impact on the overall growth of overall GDP. And the chapter 6, which is of the economic survey, ends up by saying that the railways really cannot continue the way they have continued, that they need to restructure themselves to become independent, to be able to become self-sustainable, and that in any case, as we move forward with the kind of investments which are needed, there is a need for huge capital investment which is needed, and most of the capital investment would willy-nilly have to come from the private sector. And Ms. Purandare spoke very, very lucidly about the need about the kind of the due diligence which goes into any specific project that is undertaken by either a financier or an operator or a supplier even, or a concessionaire. And we've been talking for quite a while about PPP projects, but when we talk about PPP projects, we are never clear about how the operation and maintenance cost is allocated or a particular section. I know we have the demand 3 to 13, which is at a very macro level. So on an average, we know this is the amount of money that is spent across the railways. But when it comes to granularity, I think we miss a lot on that. And I will give an example on this one. So suppose we were to look at the railway as a business. What does the railway sell? The railways essentially sells services, and services by their nature are non-inventoryable. You cannot put an inventory around the services. And the non-inventoryable portion of the services is a path. So we have trains running across the length and breadth of the country, and what is actually being sold is a path. And a path is basically a clear defined from an origin to a destination. There is a certain path available. What is the cost of the path? The cost of the path varies for different types of sections. So if you have a double line, or you have a single line, you have a automatic signaling, or you have a standard one interlocking, for example, or you have an electrified, or you have a non-electrified. So there are so many parameters which are fixed components of the fixed infrastructure which impact on the cost of a path. But even more than that, there's a dynamic element to it, which is the congestion. So when you run a train on a section which is congested, there is a significantly higher cost to it than when you run it when you're just running one train. And therefore, to be able to fathom and to be able to measure the cost of running a train under specific conditions, under specific path, is something that level of granularity is mandatory, is required. Because let us say we talk about, there are about 1,300 passenger trains which are running. If you look at the trains at a glance, there are maybe about 3,300, 3,500 trains which are timetabled in the passenger timetable. We know in general that, okay, we don't make money in AC two-tier, we make money in three-tier ordinary, we make money on Rajdhanis, but what we are missing is the granularity. And therefore, a key question to be asked is, can we set up a system by which we are able to accumulate costs section by section for each train as it traverses from an origin to a destination, looking at the physical parameters that exist, but also looking at the other trains which are running on every single section? And then to be able to look at to come to a number of, what is the long-term line or variable cost. And I know today with the existing accounting system, we are able to come up with a number, but what is the veracity and what is the level of confidence we have in that number is a question mark. Long ago, I think about 15 years ago or something like that, we had done a study and we discovered that we tried to work out costing for every single train which is listed on the trains at a glance. And we built a decision support tool around it. And we discovered, to a real surprise, that there are trains which have a cost to revenue ratio of 3 times That means there are trains which have a 3 times cost to the revenue. And then there are trains, the best train was the one which had a revenue of say 1.1 times to the revenue. And we were able to determine what happens if we change the configuration of the train. Let's say we add an additional air conditioning coach. We replace an AC 3 tier with an AC 2 tier. We double head the locomotive. So we were able to do that type of analysis. But again, it was a very, very, I would say, very macro type of analysis because we didn't have the numbers. We didn't have real numbers on the ground. And therefore, I'm hoping that with the accounting reforms, we are able to move towards a better costing, a better system of costing of the single service which we provide, which is transport service, which I said is non-inventoriable. The second point I'd like to mention is on outcome budgeting and focusing on the outcomes. So, Indian Railways procurement roughly about 120, 130,000 crores in a year, that's roughly. We have a huge revenue budget. Most of the procurement happens through BOQ item rate contracts, where we engage suppliers, we engage contractors. Basically, we pay them based on the inputs that they provide. That's how much steel they provide, how much cement, how much manpower. And we have a schedule of rates and bidders quote so much percentage above SOR and below SOR. So the procurement process is totally driven by inputs, not by outcomes. The one contract which we have actually signed, which is on an outcome driven, Mr. Sudhir is sitting there, is essentially the Madhepura project, which mandates us to provide a certain quality of service at a certain price. So we are required to provide X% reliability uptime, not to have so many number of failures. Beyond that failures, we get penalized. If we reduce the number of failures, we get rewarded. I think that's probably the only contract which I can remember within the Indian Railways, where the focus is on outcomes. So if we are going to talk about performance budgeting, we are talking about outcome-oriented approach, then we require a radical shift in our procurement mechanism. We cannot have procurement based on item rate contracts, which are more driven by BOQ, and then expect to have a budgeting which is outcome oriented. There's a bit of a disconnect there. And therefore, to bring about this change, therefore, we have to not only do our accounting reforms, we also have to change our procurement processes, our procurement reforms, and even beyond that, if we have to look at going back to my earlier point, what does it cost to run a train? To run a train, you need civil engineering, you need electrical, you need various other functions and various other departments. And they have to look at the entire thing in its entirety. So there could be projects which are related to improvement, which are across departments and across functions. So accounting reforms in isolation will probably not get us where we want to get. And if we don't make this as a more broad-based act, then I think we were not likely to get where we want to get. To me, the process of accounting reforms has to start even below the division. It has to start at the section level. And long ago, we used to have the spending unit where we used to try and define the expense being related to a specific section or a specific corridor. But over time, I think we lost that. At some point, we used to have operating statistics which used to be generated, which used to tell us how much is the operation output from specific sections. But we never had a system of linking it to the input side. That means how much expenditure we have incurred. And therefore, to be able to move beyond the error of averages, where we say the swimming pool is on an average 4 feet deep, somewhere it's 6, somewhere it's 4, and someone like me who's less than 6 jumps in and then drowns. So we have to get beyond that. That means we have to get more granularity into the scheme of things. And I'm hoping that accounting reforms is able to provide us that type of input. Thank you very much.